So this week, we are going to cover how to do HTML lists. So unordered lists, which are bulleted lists, and ordered lists, which are numeric lists. We will also cover how to create graphical tables and how to apply CSS to those lists and tables. We're going to talk about CSS borders, which are typically applied to lists and tables, but you can actually apply them to anything. In fact, if you look below lesson 5, you see this lovely rounded corner rectangle that was applied using a CSS border. So you can literally apply them to anything. So you're going to want to read those pages in the book. You'll notice that there's pages from the HTML chapter and the CSS chapter, and then go through the lecture demo. And so we talk about, first of all, the 3 different types of lists that you can have with HTML and how to create each one. And then the different attributes you can use. So here's a type attribute for an ordered list. And so instead of having numbers, you can get lowercase Roman. Here's an interactive link so you can kind of play around with it, but you've got type of 1, which is a regular number, uppercase A, lowercase a, uppercase I, lowercase I. Then you can also apply CSS to change the order value. So instead of a number, you can do a letter. And so this would be the CSS way of doing it. Same exact thing, except for we're using the style attribute instead of the type attribute. Then we've got unordered lists, which also use a style to change the way that the bullet looks. So, if you don't like a regular bullet, you can have a square or a disc. There's other types that you can kind of play with, and here's a link that will let you do that. Then there is something called a description list. And with a description list, things are not numbered and they are not bulleted, they are indented. So you've got an opening description list and a closing. Then you have DT, which to me is like a data term, is how I look at it. And then below that, and indented is going to be the DD tag. And that is supposed to be a description tag. And you can have more than one, but all of those lines are going to be indented. One interesting thing you can do with your lists is you can nest them. Now, this is something that the validator is oftentimes going to give you warnings on or errors on. And, as long as you nest them correctly, you are fine. So a nested list is a list inside another list. And for some reason, the validator gets a little freaked out by this, but as long as you have an opening and a closing in your nested list and your outer list has an opening and a closing, they are correct. Borders in CSS. So borders are actually kind of fun, and you can put borders, on the top or on the bottom, on the right or on the left. And you can specify different widths, different styles, different colors. So it's a lot of fun to work with borders. And so here are just some examples, of how to create borders. And here's an interactive link so you guys can play with it. Graphical tables. Now, graphical tables are actually used a lot. Sometimes they are used to line up things in a page and they don't have borders at all, like they're invisible tables. but you'll notice things are lined up. And quite often it's a table that's doing that. So this is not an invisible table because we can see the borders. But the way that you create tables is there's an opening and a closing table tag. And then inside the table, you specify your rows with a table row tag. And then inside the table rows, you have your detail information. And the detail information can either be a heading tag, which is like a column heading, or it can be just a regular TD tag, which is where your data is displayed. Okay, so this would be a table with 2 rows. First row has headings and the second row does not. And there are 3 columns. So each of these represents a separate column within a single row. And this is how it looks without any borders. So without the borders, it's kind of an invisible table. And like I said, these are used all over the place to line up data in web pages. Captioning. So you can create a caption for your table, and the caption tag would go right after the opening table tag, and it typically displays up here at the top. Now, if you would like it to display at the bottom, you can use the caption side attribute and tell it bottom. Other tags that you see within a table are basically grouping tags. So anything that is part of a heading goes inside table heading tags, and anything that's part of a body goes inside table body tags. And at the bottom, you can see a table footer tag. Okay, so those grouping tags are quite often used as well. As far as formatting goes, tables are typically formatted with CSS, and CSS is used to specify the width of the table. And it can be a percentage of the screen size, or you can specify a width in pixels. The default is 100%, just so you know. And those CSS borders that we were talking about before can be applied and are quite often applied to tables. And so this is the border CSS. That would be how it looks. Here's another example. And so this is formatting on the table level. Now, in addition, sometimes people want formatting on the cell level, and quite often they want to specify a width for a column. And you can do that in the very first column. So here's my first row. And if I do a style and set the width, I can do that in just the first column, and it will affect all the rest of, the columns in the rows. So if I want column 1 to have a width of 25%, I only need to enter it here. For CSS, I can also specify background color, color for text. If I want the cells to stand out a little bit more, I can do like a right border and a bottom border. I can align the text. So there's all sorts of styling that you can do in your tables to make them stand out. You can also merge cells. So instead of having 2 rows with name in it, I can simply merge those cells. Or in this case, I'm merging rows. In this case, I'm merging columns. And there are special attributes for that. There's row span and column span, depending on what you want to merge. Vertical alignment, we've talked about this before, but this is typically used in a table, especially if you have merged either your rows or columns, because you don't want the text to display at the bottom because that would look kind of silly. You would probably tell it, middle, which makes sense, or you might even move the text up to the top. Okay, and that's where vertical align comes into play. Now, there is something new in CSS that allows you to specify columns. And so you don't have to, if what you want is newspaper columns, you don't have to do that in a table. There is CSS for that now. So you can tell it how many columns using column count. You can do a gap between your columns. And that can be pixels or a percentage. And if you actually want a line to display between the columns, you can specify that using column rule. Okay, and so here I've actually got a class called newspaper, and I'm specifying all of them. So if I have like an article element with a bunch of text that I want in news columns, I can actually say class equals newspaper, and it will format that for me. So knowing all of this about our lists and our tables and columns, you are ready to work on the textbook assignment. So for this particular assignment, because our focus is on doing the different types of lists and newspaper columns and tables, you're going to be downloading 3 HTML files that will let you focus and practice on those skills. You will also be downloading graphics and some CSS. And then the first one is a recipe. It's a real recipe. You guys could actually make this. And you will be formatting this using lists. That's basically what we're using this for. And you'll also be adding a little table to it. So you're going to have to do some converting of paragraphs. This is showing you what your file should look like. And then you're going to create some nested lists. So this is what it should look like in the browser, but this is what your code is going to look like. Okay, and there's a video that kind of walks you through this. The style sheet for this is external, so you are going to need to add some CSS to that as well. Don't forget to add this CSS. And then this little prep, cook, and total time is actually in a table, so you're going to be adding that. And this shows you where that goes. And at that point, you'll be done with the recipe, and you'll move on to Hitchcock, which is going to give you practice with the graphical table. And you are going to be using call span and row span with this. Okay, so there's CSS you're going to be adding, and then you'll be doing the call span and row span. And then finally, you will be adding CSS to take the file, the breaking news file, and create news columns. And this is the CSS you need for that. So that's giving you practice working on everything that was covered in the chapter, and then you are ready to do your own. So for your own, you can create a page on whatever you want, but you need to use lists and tables. So you have to have at least one unordered list, one ordered list, and a table. And you can do it on whatever you want. So an example would be that cream cheese crumb cake recipe. You can do a recipe, you can do an ad, you can do a flyer. I've got an example of a resume that incorporates this, but you literally can do whatever you want. Okay. And There's some minimal amount of styling that you need to do. The style sheet can be internal or external. So here's an example of an external style sheet. You'll notice that I did not include any of the values. You guys would need to put those in yourselves. And it's going to kind of depend on what content you have. So if we take a look at this, if you right click and you go to view page source, you can see I did an internal style sheet on this. And for the table, I did set a width. You guys do need to do that, and that should be done in an inline style just like this. Okay, because that is another requirement. You are also going to do a news column page, and the content can be whatever you want. We had headline news in the textbook assignment. Here's another example of something you could do. Okay, so totally up to you. For this one, if you wanted to see how I did this, I've got basically a border, and then I've got, the column rules in here. But if you view page source, you can actually see the CSS that I used. And then the last thing here that you're going to do is update your assignment page. And so what you're going to do is change the paragraph tags to bullets. And so this kind of tells you how to do it using a shortcut in VS Code. So you can actually use this little find and replace, have it find a P and an angle bracket, replace it with an LI and an angle bracket, and that is going to save you a whole bunch of typing. Okay, because this is what it's going to end up looking like. And these used to all be paragraphs. So if you kind of follow this little trick, do it just like that, that is going to save you a ton of typing. And then you just have to put in the beginning and closing, opening and closing UL tags. So this is what you're going to be graded on. And if you guys run into any problems or have questions, please let me know, because I am here to help you. I did include some additional information here. This is all optional, but there are some kind of cool extensions for VS Code. And if you guys are curious, if you've noticed that my VS Code looks a little different than yours, it's probably because I have extensions applied. So there's a lot of extensions that deal with color and themes. So I have kind of given you some resources for that. And, feel free to share any extensions that you found that you like. Feel free to share them with your classmates. If you have questions, need help, let me know, and have a great week.